Hello everyone, welcome to the course of Automotive Manufacturing Processes and Technology. Myself, Vimal Salot from LJ Institute of Engineering and Technology. In this session, we are going to discuss about some basic aspect of casting that will include definition, terminology, classification, what is the basic procedure, advantages, limitations, and the application of casting. So let us first understand what is casting. In this process, molten metal is poured inside a mold cavity. After pouring, it is allowed to solidify for some time. The solidified piece is known as a casting. Here you can see in this photograph, it is a molten metal. It is shown by this golden yellow color and it is a molding flask. So there is a cavity or mold which is already done here. So in that cavity, this molten metal is poured. After completion of pouring, it will allow to solidify or cool down for some time, and after that it will be removed from the mold and the obtained solidified piece is known as casting. Let us understand the terminology related to this process with a simple example. So here you can see a diagram of a workpiece which we want to produce by casting process. Dimension may be any. We are considering this simple example for better understanding of the concept. So it is a front view of the part. It also contains a hole inside it. In drawing, it is shown by this dotted line. So it is a hollow cavity or hole which is required to produce in this workpiece. So the important point is that there should not be metal flow in this particular area. We have to design the molding in that way. Now let us see terminology and what are the equipments related with the casting. So here one complete casting setup is shown. This whole box is known as molding flask. It is made up of two parts. Upper part is known as cope, lower part is known as the drag. Both of this cope and drag can be aligned with the help of this dowel pin. So these dowel pins are helpful for the proper alignment of cope and drag. It is a bottom board which is initially used before the molding process. This line is known as a parting line. So from this line, cope and drag both can be differentiated. Here this pattern is shown by this way. Actually, pattern is a replica or duplicate of the workpiece which we want to produce. So as I show you, it is a workpiece which we want to produce and it is a hole which should also be there, right? So here it is a pattern of this workpiece. Now this pattern is fixed in this drag portion. Around the pattern the sand is rammed. It is known as a molding sand. So here it is shown by this brown color in both cope and drag. Actually it is a sectional front view of this setup. So we can see all the parts easily. The molten metal is shown by this blue color. It is a ladle which is useful to pour the molten metal inside the cavity. So molten metal is flowing in this way. This vertical part is known as a sprue through which metal is flowing. This horizontal part is known as a runner through which metal is flowing and it will enter inside the mold cavity. The exact entry point of the metal to the mold cavity is known as a gate. So this point is a gate. This part is known as a core. As we know that workpiece has a hole inside it, so it is important that there should not be metal flow in this particular region. So to prevent the metal flow in this particular region, core is placed here. It is made from the core sand, and this part is known as a riser. As molten metal is flowing in this direction through this passage, when this cavity fills completely with the molten metal, it will try to come up through this riser part. So we can notice that the cavity is filled up completely. So these are the terminology which is related to the casting. Molding flask, which is made up from two part, that is upper part is cope, lower part is drag, it is a bottom board. This whole system is a gating system which contains sprue, runner, gate and riser, and if any casting has hole like hollow feature, then it is also necessary to use a core. Dowel pin are useful for the perfect alignment of cope and drag. Now let's see the different types or classification of casting processes. Broadly, casting processes can be classified in two categories, that is single use mold casting process and multiple use mold casting process. Now what do you mean by single use mold casting process? So in this process, the mold which is used is broken after the completion of the process. But in this case, in the case of multiple use mold, the same mold can be used again and again for the production of a casting. Now single use mold casting has two types, that is multiple use pattern and single use pattern. So in case of multiple use pattern, we can use the same pattern again and again, but in case of single use pattern, the pattern can be used only once. So there are again three types for multiple use casting, that is green shelled or dry sand mold casting, CO2 molding and shell molding. In case of single use pattern, the type is known as investment casting process. So in this process, the pattern which is used is vaporized after the completion of the process, so it cannot be used again and again. Now multiple use mold casting are slush casting, die casting, centrifugal casting and continuous casting process. Now let's see what is the basic procedure or which are the steps are involved in casting process. So very first step towards the casting process is pattern making. Now we know that what is pattern. So pattern is actually duplicate or replica of the workpiece which we want to manufacture by casting process. It may be made from the wooden or plastic, and if it is to be used for multiple times, then it can be made from metal also. So there are certain types of pattern and there are certain allowances which are necessary while pattern making. All those details we will study in our next session. Next step is core making. If any casting contains hollow cavity or hole like feature, then it is important to prevent the metal flow inside that cavity or inside that hollow feature. So to prevent the metal flow, for that purpose, the component which is used is known as a core, and the procedure is known as a core making process. It is also made up from the sand. So actually, what is the difference between pattern and core? Both are the cavities which are useful to produce a casting, but pattern is removed after the molding is completed and core remains inside the mold cavity. So always this core will remain in contact with molten metal. So it is subjected with high thermal stresses and high temperature. Next step is mold making. Now in mold making, we have to exactly fix the pattern in the cope and drag part, and surrounding the pattern we have to rim up the sand, that is molding sand. It is known as a ramming process. So after ramming, the pattern is removed and the retained cavity is known as a mold. Also it includes the designing of gating system, which includes the placing of sprue, riser, runner and gates. Then next step is melting and pouring. In a good quality production of casting, molten metal is also important. So there are some equipment which can be useful to carry the molten metal from the furnace to the mold. So after completion of melting, pouring is done with the help of a pouring basin, or it is also known as a ladle. Then solidification and mold breaking. After completion of metal pouring, it is allowed to cool down or solidify for some time. Then mold is breaked and the solidified piece is taken out, which is actually required casting. Then final step is cleaning and finishing. Casting is the process in which we cannot get the final product because it doesn't have that much good surface finish. So always it is necessary to clean the casting and to do some machining process on the casting, so we can get good surface finish and good dimensional accuracy. So these are the basic steps which are involved in casting process. Now let's see what are the advantages of this process. So first advantage is the most complicated shapes can be easily cast by this process. Almost any material can be cast. The tools and equipments which are used are very simple and inexpensive. Extremely large or heavy objects can be made by casting, which were otherwise difficult to produce by other manufacturing processes. It is suitable for small production as well for mass or large production also. What is the limitation of this process? It has low dimensional accuracy and always it will require some final finishing process to get the desired shape and size of the object. Applications of this process are: all machine tool beds are generally made from casting, as all the beds are heavy in section and large in size. Cast iron is used, which has very good casting properties, and it would be very easier to make all these beds by casting process. So beds of lathe machine, shaper machine, planing machine, milling machine, drilling machine, almost beds of all machine tools are generally made by the casting process. Then cylinder blocks, piston, piston ring, liners, these are the components of IC engine which can also be made by this casting process. Pump housings, valve bodies, wheels. So these are some applications which can be useful to produce a part by casting process. Thank you very much for watching.